Do you remember how a classroom could fall silent in an instant? Not because anyone shouted, but because a look said everything. Back then, most people accepted this without question. A raised eyebrow, a pause in the lesson, and every child knew the rules without them ever being spoken. No notes home, no discussions, just an understanding that behavior had consequences. Back then, no one thought twice about it, yet imagine that same moment today, replayed through modern eyes. What once felt perfectly normal would now cause absolute outrage, and that contrast is where our story begins for everyone watching. A Britain recovering from war was a place shaped by rebuilding, routine, and shared values. Classrooms were crowded, homes were busy, and resources were limited, so order mattered. Authority figures were respected not out of fear, but because they represented stability in a world still finding its feet. Teachers, parents, and neighbors were all part of the same quiet agreement about how children should behave. Discipline was seen as preparation, not punishment. Childhood was understood as training for adult responsibility, where learning to listen, wait, and comply were considered essential life skills. In a society focused on moving forward together, there was little room for individual negotiation. Rules existed to keep things running smoothly, whether in school corridors or at the dinner table. Children were expected to fit into the world, not the other way around. Today, we talk about choice, expression, and emotional understanding. But back then, the priority was resilience and respect. To understand those everyday childhood consequences, we have to see them through the eyes of a Britain still rebuilding itself. It was a time when structure felt comforting, and many families believed firm guidance helped children find their place in society without constant explanation or discussion. The rules at school were rarely written down, yet everyone knew them by heart. A classroom filled with chalk dust and wooden desks carried its own quiet order. When someone was told to stand silently, it wasn't seen as dramatic, just part of learning where boundaries lay. Writing the same sentence again and again was another familiar ritual, meant to encourage reflection rather than explanation. Sometimes you were moved away from friends. Your desk shifted just enough to feel the difference. Other times, playtime disappeared, and you watched the clock ticking louder than usual, every second stretching. There was always that sinking feeling when your name was called, a hush falling across the room as others avoided eye contact. No one asked why, you already knew. These moments were ordinary, woven into the rhythm of school life. Teachers believed consistency built character, and parents largely agreed. It was understood that fairness meant everyone followed the same rules, even if they felt strict. Today, such practices would prompt meetings, policies, and serious concern. Back then, they barely earned a mention at home. Looking back now, it's striking how unquestioned it all was. There were no debates about feelings or long discussions about intent. School was a place of structure, and children adapted quickly. Those everyday experiences shaped how a generation learned patience, obedience, and quiet resilience, setting the tone for lessons that went far beyond reading and arithmetic. It quietly prepared them for a world that expected compliance before comfort often. If school taught structure, home reinforced it quietly, often without discussion. The smell of tea cooling on the table signaled the end of the day, and with it came clear expectations. Bedtimes were early and rarely debated, even when daylight still lingered outside. Chores were done properly or done again, not as a punishment, but as a lesson in doing things right. Houses grew quiet at dusk, the wireless humming softly, adults tired from long days. If you stepped out of line, you might be sent to sit alone, not spoken to harshly, just removed from the noise. There were no long explanations, only the familiar phrase, "You'll understand when you're older," and most of the time, you accepted that you didn't need to understand right now. Parents believed consistency mattered more than conversation. Life, after all, wasn't going to stop and explain itself either. In a world shaped by routine and responsibility, children were expected to adapt quickly. Love was shown through provision and stability, not through endless reassurance. Looking back, many adults now recognize how these moments shaped resilience. You learned to manage disappointment, to wait, to keep feelings tucked away. Yet, there was silence too, an unspoken side to growing up that rarely found words. Home and school worked hand in hand, preparing children for a society that valued composure above complaint. And this didn't end at the front door, because beyond home waited a wider world with its own expectations. Public places carried their own rules, and everyone seemed to know them. Shops, streets, and buses were not just places you passed through. They were shared spaces where behavior mattered. If you forgot yourself, a neighbor might quietly step in, or a shopkeeper might offer a firm reminder. Imagine a stranger stepping in today. It would be unthinkable. Yet back then, it felt normal. Bus conductors, crossing attendants, even friends of your parents all played a role. They weren't being unkind. They were protecting a sense of order that belonged to everyone. Children learned quickly that their actions reflected not just on themselves, but on their family and street. A look or a word was usually enough. This was shared responsibility in action. Adults felt accountable for the atmosphere of public life, and children understood they were being watched, gently but constantly. Today, boundaries are clearer and parenting is private, with correction kept within families. Back then, the village still existed in everyday form. These public lessons taught awareness, courtesy, and restraint, shaping how children moved through the world long before anyone spoke about social skills or behavior management. Those quiet expectations lingered long after childhood ended for many people. Looking back now, it's tempting to judge those years through modern eyes, but memory has a softer edge. Those everyday consequences helped shape a generation known for independence, patience, and a quiet kind of strength. You learned to cope, to wait your turn, to carry on without needing constant reassurance. For many, that became a source of pride later in life. And yet, it's fair to pause and wonder, did it toughen us, or did it teach us to stay silent? Were we resilient, or simply used to not being asked how we felt? These are questions that linger with age, especially when watching today's children grow up surrounded by conversation and care. Would they cope the same way we did if placed back then? Or are they better off now? Perhaps both things can be true. Something was gained over time, certainly. But something else may have quietly slipped away too, unnoticed until we stop and reflect on how childhood once felt. Today, childhood sounds different. There is softer language, more conversation, and far greater emotional awareness than there once was. What felt normal decades ago would now raise serious questions, and rightly so. Yet neither era was perfect, only shaped by its time. The rules of yesterday reflected a society built on order and endurance, while today's reflect care and understanding. Perhaps the real lesson isn't about rules at all, but how childhood always mirrors the values we choose to live by.